So in this lesson, we're going to talk about the overview of market structures. So this is the very first lesson in our market structures unit. And in class, we did a quick little demonstration with some candy that illustrated some of the differences between these four different market structures. But for us, in the video, we're going to make some references to that, but I'll try to use some more real-world examples that'll help you understand these. So there are different types of markets. So far, we've been studying perfect competition, which makes a lot of assumptions about markets that end up not usually holding true in practice. Most markets end up being one of these, imperfectly competitive. Now, the simplest question that we ask when we try to figure out what kind of market structure are we dealing with, are we dealing with monopoly, oligopoly, monopolistic competition, or perfect competition, is actually how many firms there are, right? How many firms there are is the overriding concern, the most important one. All of these other ones are usually corresponding to the number of firms, but what we're going to find is that this is the big kahuna of them. So we'd say that for perfect competition, you need many firms, and we could summarize that as maybe thousands, right? Thousands of firms. So the ag industry would be a good example, and by that, agricultural industry is what I mean by that. So soybean markets and wheat markets and things like that, where you have thousands of farmers and thousands of buyers. And so the second one, monopolistic competition, this one's also going to be many, but it's going to be fewer than thousands. We're talking about, within a geographic area, tens to hundreds of firms. So here's an important distinction. Within a geographic area, right? So in a metropolitan area, in a big city, you might have dozens, if not hundreds, of restaurants, right? So restaurants are a common example here. Restaurants. But in some places, if it's a truck stop and there's two fast food restaurants, that's not going to be monopolistic competition if there's only two restaurants. Grocery stores are another common example of monopolistic competition because in a big city you usually have tens, if not even 100 grocery stores. But in a small town, you might only have one, and that would be a monopoly, right? If you only have one place, then that's what we're talking about within a geographic area. So we'd say few is a characteristic of oligopoly, and that's like 2 to 9. Right? Anything more than 8 or 9 is probably even too many. You're not going to get economists who will agree on that 9 number, but the 2 is a hard and fast rule. If it's fewer than 2, then it's just 1. 1. And if it's 1, and that's in a geographic area, we call it a monopoly. So if it's a bike shop in, Nome, Alaska, it's the only bike shop in town within hundreds of miles, it's probably a monopoly. It is a monopoly. An oligopoly would be things like airlines, right? Airlines, or cell phone service, because there's about 3 or 4 of those. With monopolies, they're most common in a big city with things like utilities. Usually we only have one electric company, not one place that you can buy electricity from. You only have one water company, one sewer company, that kind of thing. So utilities are a pretty common example. Another would be if you have an artificial monopoly where they have a patent or a copyright on a particular product. If you wanted to buy that particular product, that feature, that item, you have to go through that company, so there's only one seller. For control over price, this is a pretty hard and fast one as well. We would say that the perfectly competitive firms have none, and so they are what we call price takers. They cannot set a market price. All 3 of the other ones, monopolistic competition, oligopoly, and monopoly, are what we call price makers. Now, they have very little, the monopolistic competition. But they still have a little bit, right? Some still. They still have some price setting ability. Oligopolies have, and we'd say it varies, but it's usually more, and it depends on their collusion. And we're going to learn more about that word later. But it doesn't necessarily mean that they've set out a specific cartel. They could tacitly collude and end up with a relatively high price. So they could control the price much more. And then we'd say that monopolies have very high price control, but it's limited by consumer demand, And that's because they can't charge an infinitely high price. They still have to have consumers who would want to buy the product. Now, types of goods. In this one, we're going to say all their goods for perfect competition are identical. So there's no product differentiation. What does that mean? Product differentiation. That just means that the sellers do not attempt to distinguish their products from one another. There's no advertising, there's no loyalty programs, none of that kind of stuff. They're all the same, so they don't even try. In this one, monopolistic competition, we'd say they are similar, and they use product differentiation. So restaurants will often advertise, right? They'll say, if you eat our food, you'll be cool. If you buy a Happy Meal, your children will love you because they'll be happy, and all that kind of stuff. Now, oligopolies will sometimes be similar, and sometimes will do differentiation. Not always, though. So usually their products are similar enough. They're not going to have identical ones for the most part. There are occasionally situations where they produce identical products, but in those cases they don't differentiate. But when they don't have identical products, they have similar products. You have an airline. Fly Delta Airlines. We'll take care of you. If you fly Southwest, we'll be nice to you. We'll give you free bags. They do some product differentiation. It depends on kind of that sector. So this one is not always a good one to always use to distinguish. For monopolies, well, they don't have the identical products because there is only one kind, right? This is a unique product. And there's no product differentiation. They don't need to because it's unique, right? They don't even try to differentiate their products. You never see the electricity company advertising. Now, barriers to entry. And this is saying, is it easy? And we're going to say exit as well. Barriers to enter and exit. This is it easy to start a new business? Is it hard? And is it easy to shut down? Is it hard? And so it's relatively straightforward, actually, to start a farm. You put seeds in the ground, and then now you're a farmer. It's relatively easy to stop being a farmer. You stop planting. Now, granted, there are obviously some input costs that are associated with it, but that's true of every single firm on the list. We'd say that there aren't very many regulatory framework things involved here. Being these thousands of soybean farmers out there, it's relatively straightforward. So we would say there are none, or in practicality, we know that there are some, but they are very low barriers. Now, with monopolistic competition, you're running a grocery store or a restaurant, there are some licensing and regulatory things, and it's going to take a little bit longer to start it up, and it's going to take a little bit longer than to shut it down if things aren't going your way. So we'd say there are some, right? And with oligopolies, they are significant, right? It's pretty tough to start a new airline. It's pretty tough to start a new cell phone provider service. It's also difficult to shut them down. What do you do with all those airplanes if you shut down your airline? So there are significant barriers to entry and exit. And with monopolies, we would say it is prohibitive in the sense that it is nearly impossible to start a new one. It's also nearly impossible to shut down. So if we're talking about a utility, the electric company and the water company, they don't shut down. Nor do people just decide, I'm going to start a new one. That doesn't happen. If you had a artificial monopoly created through a patent or a copyright, it's also prohibitive. It's literally prohibited for someone to say, I'm going to start a new thing if you have a copyright on it. It's against the law. So it's prohibitively high barriers, prohibitively high barriers. So hopefully this helps you make sense of our 4 market structures, and I'll see you next time.